Hello. Hopefully you all enjoyed lunch. Excellent. Yeah. Well, now the moment you've all been waiting for, we're going to hear from our author and our special guest here in just a moment. But before we do, I wanted to take a moment and just thank you all for being here today. I wanted to especially thank our sponsors, thank all of our board members who are here, wanted to thank just everyone that loves libraries that took a minute to join us in the room today or on our video feed. So this is a hybrid event. Some of you may be aware of that, but man, it feels good to be back, doesn't it? Yeah, wow. My name is Shannon Sweek, and I get to be the board president of Friends of Milwaukee Public Library. And it's such an honor because honestly, I can't think of an institution I'm more proud to give back to and volunteer my time for. And if you wonder, how could I be a friend of Milwaukee Public Library? It's very simple. There's more information in the packet that we received, but really, Friends is a grassroots organization that's all about just showing up in small ways and supporting your local library. So what that looks like in Milwaukee is perhaps you could come over to our central library branch and stop by to our bookseller store. It's reopened, yay. It is a fabulous place to find used books. I think seriously the cheapest place to find used books in the city. And what's great is the money that we raise from the bookseller, we turn around and give right back to the library in the form of programming and materials. We work very closely with Joan and her staff on really helping to support the extras that we know is a key part in what makes our libraries special. So thank you. So come by. We also accept donated books as well. So if maybe after the pandemic, you're feeling like there's still some books or items that you've enjoyed and are ready to re-gift to someone, we would be happy to receive those. And that's another way that we give back. So again, thank you all for being here. We're going to keep things moving because I know we all want to hear from our author. So excited to have her with us. I am going to turn things over to Eric Hildeman, who is going to introduce our author. So kind of fun. Eric founded the Milwaukee Science Fiction League. So there was kind of a fun connection with our author's genre and science fiction. So Eric, thank you for being here. Welcome.
Hello, everyone. I'm here to introduce two accomplished women to all of you. One is a bestseller author whose work has been featured on HBO and who shows no signs of slowing down in her production of excellent works as she presents her newly minted 6th novel to us here today. And the other is a stage director, actor, and teacher who has directed productions in many venues in Milwaukee and throughout Wisconsin. When one looks at the remarkable names who have graced this event in the past, one sees that the bar is set enormously high. Emily St John Mandel joins a long and prestigious list of writers who have addressed this luncheon: Pulitzer Prize winners, landmark poets, journalists, Newbery medalists, literary prize winners of all sorts. It has boasted such luminaries as Mary Higgins Clark, Sarah Gruen, author of Water for Elephants, Elizabeth Stout, Luis Alberto Urrea, and Elizabeth Berg. When I first read Station 11, I was struck by how relevant it was to current events. It seems eerily prophetic to write a novel about a pandemic just before one happens. Mandel is certainly not the first sci-fi writer to write about a pandemic. For example, George R. Stewart's classic Earth Abides comes to mind. But Station 11 speaks to us directly today, overlaying multiple plot lines with the strangest of threads, a science fiction comic book. And that comic book is a story within multiple stories. This is exactly why that book, Station 11, won the Arthur C. Clarke Award. I got my copy of Sea of Tranquility the moment it was released, and it quickly became apparent why the Milwaukee Public Library would want me, the science fiction geek who founded the Milwaukee Science Fiction League, to tell you all about it. And let me just tell you all, my fellow sentient balls of stardust, you are in for a real treat. This is a time travel adventure that spans light years as well as years, beginning in Britain in 1912 and spanning all the way into the moon in the 21st century. Books like this one stay with you long after you close the cover. They are the reason I live and breathe for science fiction. And who better to have a conversation with her than Marcella Kearns, a stage director who has presented Shakespeare in Door County, who's been a pillar at First Stage and whose talents have greatly benefited the Milwaukee Chamber Theater. She's the very best Wisconsin has to offer. And so it is with great pleasure that I introduce both, one, an actress, director, and educator, and the other one of my new favorite authors, bar none. Here they are, honored guests. I present to you Marcella Kearns and Emily St. John Mandel.
I don't know how we follow up an introduction. Honestly, like that was intimidating.
It was lovely.
Yeah, it was.
Lovely.
Thank
And
you.
There's a detail that I would love to call to everyone's attention if you have not noticed Eric's tie clip. A reference to Gene Roddenberry's creation, and of course, a lovely segue into Station 11 and the thing that people have shown you. They have tattooed on their own arms. Survival is insufficient.
That blew my mind, honestly.
Yeah.
So in Station 11, there's a character who has a tattoo on her left arm that reads "Survival is insufficient," which is a line that I found, that I heard on a Star Trek episode when I was 19. And it turns out you can't predict what random line from a television show that you watched when you were 19 will stay in your head for the rest of your life. But that was it for me. And a few years ago, I started seeing Station 11 tattoos. Somebody came up to me in a signing line in, I think it was Nashville, and she showed me her tattoo, and it was so disorienting. There's just this feeling like, wait, that was fiction. Like, how did that get on your arm? But it's an incredible thing to see.
It's lovely. Thank you.
Yeah.
And thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.
I have so many things that I want to pick your brain out. I too am a geek. I like to say I'm a big nerd about all things. The thing that really has struck me about your work is entirely personal. That as an Air Force kid, I grew up under the shadow of NORAD and then beside the Iron Curtain, and I was always waiting for either a sea change in how the planet operated or the collapse of civilization.
Mm-hmm.
I made a plan. I was
Okay.
10. No, I was 8 the first time I made the plan that when civilization collapsed, I would hop in a wagon and travel from community to community performing Shakespeare.
Wow, that was before Station 11.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yes.
Right.
Yes, that was during the Cold War. And so, so it was really lovely to feel like you had gotten inside my brain.
Right.
And to ask now, artist that I have become, artist to artist, I would love to launch this conversation with how inspiration becomes drafting and being for you. May I ask you about your process?
Of course, sure.
How does it begin? From where do you draw inspiration? Clearly random things like Roddenberry, but
Yeah, clearly random things, lines from TV shows that I saw when I was 19. It really depends on the book, but since we've started with Station 11, at some point I came across an anecdote. I think it was an oral history of the Public Theater in New York City, where somebody made passing reference to that time that actor died on stage of a heart attack in the 4th act of King Lear. And as a novelist, you're always looking for those moments. I remember reading that and thinking, that's an opener. Like that would be a really gripping way to open a novel. So I had the premise. My original idea was that Station 11 was not going to be post-apocalyptic at all. It was going to be set completely in the present day. I'd written 3 crime novels, and I wanted to do something completely different. I'm interested in what it means to devote your life to your art, the costs and the joys of that. And I thought maybe I'll write about the lives of actors in some underfunded, underappreciated traveling Shakespeare company, which most of them are, is the fact of our culture. At the same time, though, there was something that I've been wanting to write about for a while and thinking about the best way to approach. And that was a sense of awe that I felt and that I actually still feel at the technology that surrounds us, which we have a habit of taking for granted because we can. But it is actually extraordinary that we carry supercomputers in our pockets and call them phones. I'll leave Milwaukee at some point in the next few hours and I'll go to bed in New York City tonight. Even just the little things they're not little, but the things that seem minor, like the way somebody walked into this room, flipped a switch, and the room was flooded with electric light. It's a big deal, all these things, and we don't notice them. It seemed to me that maybe an interesting way for me to think about them was to contemplate their absence. So the project in Station 11 was, I found myself thinking, what if I keep that original idea with the theater company, but I set it in a post-technological world as a way of thinking more deeply about our technology. So that was the seed of it. But then to go back to that original scene, the actor dying of a heart attack in the fourth act of Lear, sometimes I'll just start with that and the scene will suggest what happens next, or will at least suggest who the other characters were. So if a guy is having a heart attack on stage, somebody is going to leap forward and try to save him. So that gave me Jeevan. And at the time I was writing the book, I'd recently seen this really moving production of Lear in New York City. It starred Kevin Kline as Lear. It was directed by James Lapine. It was at the Public Theater, and he did this, Lapine did this really interesting thing that he had these three little girls on stage as the audience entered in non-speaking roles. And they were just like coloring in a map of England divided into thirds. And then we saw them again in the mad scene as hallucinations. And it was just a really interesting, effective piece of staging because it forced you to contemplate the idea that those two evil daughters had once been children. And it just added a whole dimension that I never really thought about before. So I thought, I'm just going to copy that staging. I put them in the acknowledgements, so I didn't steal anything. But and then that immediately gave me new characters. That's Kirsten, the little girl on stage, and then we get to see her again 20 years later. So yeah, I start with a scene, but also sometimes there are other ideas in there.
Rather than outlining.
Yeah, which has been a leap for me in starting to work in television.
Oh,
because in TV, you kind of need to know the whole season before you start writing the pilot, is what I've learned the hard way. So So it's a new skill set. Yeah, I've never outlined a novel. I've just kind of winged it. That makes for an incredibly messy first draft. I'm going to say, like, nobody reads my first drafts because they're catastrophic. So, it's like, I have this train wreck of a first draft, and then I spend a really long time revising to try to find the book in that.
That's fascinating to me because what ends up happening is we see motifs, we see questions that you return to in variations on a theme. And now with Station 11, with The Glass Hotel, and with Sea of Tranquility, the threads that we see are, the threads that I see, I guess, as a reader, which I'd love you to speak to if you would, are against the backdrop of some kind of climactic event. So an economic collapse, a pandemic, we see the story of those who need to continue in the face of that. So in that way, they maybe are apocalyptic,
right?
In different ways, but it's really the apocalypse of the individual.
Right, that makes sense.
So how do you know, I guess, in terms of your process, do you know, or do you sense that those are the questions that you're tugging at, or do you know the questions you want to tug out and seek them out as you begin to revise?
Maybe a little of both. I feel like I can't overemphasize how bad my first drafts are. So like anything that seems consistent, or like I've returned to the same themes or motifs or answering questions in the third act that I posed in the first, that was all in the revision.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, you've touched upon something interesting with these sort of mass disasters, which I don't know. I've been insisting for years that they're coincidental, but I realize that sounds increasingly implausible as I write books with disasters in them. With Station 11, I just wanted to get us to a post-technological narrative, which meant you've got to end the world somehow. You got to get from point A to point B, which I realize makes me sound like a psychopath, but that was the thought process. So with that, it wasn't really about disaster per se. That was just what we needed to do to get to that world. With The Glass Hotel, every character in that book is completely fictional, but it was based on a specific crime. I was thinking about Bernie Madoff's Ponzi scheme, which of course imploded in December 2008. So there I kind of had this specific catastrophe in mind that I wanted to write about.
I'm very interested in how, as well, you've spoken of your interest in beginning to create a multiverse.
Yeah.
And we see characters leapfrogging from, so Miranda and Leon from Station 11, we see them appear in the Glass Hotel. And then of course we see in parallel realities or in the multiverse, we see other characters appear in Sea of Tranquility. Can you speak to your love of and interest in seeing characters find different courses or paths?
Yeah, definitely. I sometimes just get really attached to particular characters. Where in Station 11, I really liked Miranda and Leon in particular. So when I was writing The Glass Hotel, I just found myself thinking about them and thinking of whether I could bring them back. That presented kind of a formidable logistical challenge since I did kill them off in Station 11. But you know what? It's fiction. You can work around that. So so what I tried to do was lay the groundwork for this idea of parallel universes to suggest through various lines at the end of Station 11 and beginning at the Glass Hotel, that those books kind of occupy parallel realities. That was a way to bring back Miranda and see more of her life as a shipping executive, which is something you see a lot of in the HBO adaptation, but not so much in the novel. And also to give Leon this role, because I really liked him. Then with Sea of Tranquility, once I decided that it was going to be a time travel novel, I was thinking, well, what are the time points? There's a particular point in our recent history that I'm fascinated by, and that is the month of February 2020. Which I don't know. I would assume the experience must be pretty similar here, but here's how it played out in New York City. We knew what was coming. I mean, we're not actually idiots. We could read the paper, we could see the reports. We were hearing these reports of this catastrophic new virus in China and then Italy and elsewhere. There are 3 international airports in my city. And yet there was this mass failure of imagination where we knew what was coming, but we didn't quite believe it. We were blasé about it in kind of a breezy, deflective, defensive kind of way where, we would say to each other, oh yeah, it's definitely here. And then we would drop our kids off at school, get onto a crowded subway train, go to choir practice in an unventilated basement, and then go to work. Where you'd shake hands with strangers. The cognitive dissonance is kind of amazing to me. So once I realized I wanted to return to that point in time, I realized that I had these characters who really interested me from the book that I had just written. And that's why there are 3 characters from The Glass Hotel and Sea of Tranquility, is I wanted more of them. And it was an interesting opportunity to see them again in a totally different project.
Thanks for that. I hope that I speak for other readers here too, those of you who have had the opportunity to read it, so far as I have, that as a reader longing for a character's happiness or success is visceral and has become even more visceral during a time when a lot of us were sitting on couches alone or in our household reading, hoping that somebody would end up okay. So thank you as reader to writer. I would like to point to, I don't want to give anything away, but there is a character, there is a character in Sea of Tranquility who is an author and has at one point in an exchange, in an interview, the interviewer say that they are alone. And this is something that I've seen also as a theme or a motif that appears coincidentally or not, but the question of, or the tension between solitude and loneliness,
Right.
which characters find peace in space, like Walter in the Glass Hotel, or Miranda in her art, and which characters find, especially in Sea of Tranquility, the need to be with people as opposed to away from them. How has that, how is that something that about which you are conscious as you write, or that you would like to explore, if I may ask?
Yeah, that is something that I think about a lot, I have to say. And, you know, I could point to specific reasons, like a lot of writers, I was a really weird kid and probably didn't have a huge number of friends. I'm being honest here. I have good friends now. I do spend a lot of time with other people, but I kind of think it's a little more universal than the specifics of my biography. I think we are all prey to loneliness. But then, can you be alone and find some beauty and peace and privacy and solitude? And I do like that tension. I find it interesting. Just the idea that being alone and being lonely are by no means the same thing. And, you know, the sort of flip side of that, where sometimes being in a crowd can be incredibly lonely and alienating. And you might be happier alone in a room, and, you know, depending on the evening and how introverted you are. Yeah, it's something that I think about a lot. And going to that, that specific moment in the book you just mentioned, where the writer is talking to a journalist and the journalist kind of breaks down and says, I've just been alone for a really long time. That was something I thought about a lot in the earliest and worst days of the pandemic in the spring of 2020, where it was really hard homeschooling a kid and trying to stay sane and just like keeping everything going and making it okay for my daughter. I don't know that that was harder than the experience of my friends who were single and were just really by themselves. You know, that was something that I found myself thinking about a lot.
As a writer who spent a lot of time working on a piece, there is so much that hits home about all of our experience during the lockdown period and then in subsequent months. How, if you feel this, how do you feel this era has either altered your trajectory or deepened your process or your interests as a writer?
I think it's changed me. I think it's changed all of us, whether we're aware of it or not. I think more than one thing can be true at a time. And something that I think about for myself and in the core and thinking about these 2 years that we've just been through is, on the one hand, I feel like I had an incredibly fortunate experience and that nobody I love died of COVID-19. We were all okay. But what does it mean to be okay? You know, I feel like a lot of us aren't a lot of the time after what we've just been through. It has been a terrible 2 years in a lot of ways, with just a lot more fear and uncertainty than most of us are used to. I think one specific way it's changed me is I don't want to just make stuff alone anymore. We're like, something that I've always loved about writing novels is the solitude. I just really enjoy going into a room, closing a door and writing a book. Like it's a real pleasure in my life. The sense of a private secret world that nobody knows about until it's ready and I can show it to people. I still love that, but I've also started working in television. And the thing that I love about that is how collaborative it is. After the 2 years we've just had, it's just so fun to sit in a room with other people who are as obsessed with narrative as I am and just like build a story together, build a world together. So that's a very tangible way in which my life has changed. And I think, you know, maybe I would have done it anyway, but I think the pandemic is a big part of what's driven me toward that work.
Thanks for that. And as a theater practitioner, there's something that blooms in my heart speaking about artistic collaboration.
Yeah, absolutely. In your world, it's fundamental. Yeah.
If I may ask about specifically in the Sea of Tranquility and with this novel that is about time travel, the idea of the simulation hypothesis comes up. And this is where science fiction fans, I know, are probably really plumbing. The ideas that are expressed. How did this come to be a part
Right.
of this particular novel? Again, I don't want to give anything away,
No,
but
it's
what
fine.
you will.
Yes. So the simulation hypothesis is just this really fun internet rabbit hole that I fell down years ago. And it's what it sounds like. It's the idea that maybe all of this is a simulation. What I love about it is you can find very intelligent people to very convincingly argue either side of that argument. I take no firm stance, by the way. What it meant for me in this particular book was a way to make time travel work. So, you know, I didn't think I would ever write a time travel novel. It just wasn't really, not that I have a list of projects, but it wasn't top of mind. But then there was something about the awfulness of the pandemic where I just had this sense of, I guess I would call it a kind of creative recklessness, this feeling like, you know what, everything's terrible. I'm just going to write a fun book and it's going to be whatever I want. So I thought, okay, I'm just going to go for it. I'm writing a time travel novel. The problem that often comes up with time travel narratives is if you look too closely at them, they kind of fall apart in this sort of infinite loop way, where if I step off stage and into a time machine that takes me to Denver in 1910, I was always going to step off stage into the time machine to Denver in 1910. And it becomes this kind of circle that's kind of hard to account for in the context of a narrative. So the only way I could make that work for myself was by layering on this whole other layer of weirdness, which is the simulation hypothesis. So I could have a character in the year 2400 kind of as an avatar for the skeptical reader and also the kind of skeptical writer, frankly. So I have a character say something to the effect of, we don't understand why time travel ever works. Surely it should always create an infinite loop. We're not sure why the course of human history isn't completely altered every time somebody goes back in time. We think the fact that this works at all means there's something else going on. Maybe we're in a simulation. So it was a way to make that work for myself.
On that note, actually, a way to make it work for yourself. What do you find as you are writing and as you were discovering layers upon layers in multiple realities of the characters that you've explored? Do you find you long for, I want to give them something, I want to give them something easier, or I want to give them something harder, or just see how their lives play out were they to be given different circumstances? Do you mind my asking that?
Yeah, that makes sense. You're kind of talking about counter lives, right?
Yes,
like in the Glass Hotel.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So the Glass Hotel, I went deep on this idea that I love, which is the counter life. That's your counterfactual life. So the life you didn't lead. The life where you married a different person or immigrated instead of staying or vice versa, or went to a different school or turned left instead of right on a street corner when you were 20 and that changed everything, you know, these random things. I'm fascinated by that idea. I can think of very specific moments in my own life that were absolutely inflection points where everything would have been different if I'd done this one little thing very differently. So it's an idea that kind of fascinates me generally, and it's an idea that feels very relevant to writing fiction, where I'm always just deciding what these characters do and what happens to them. But going back to your original process question, because there is no outline, I always have this feeling at the end of a book where I have this feeling like I could have started at exactly the same point and written 10 different novels. You know, just like you choose different branching paths that start to narrow to this inevitable conclusion. So yeah, the idea of counter lives, it feels like writing fiction to me.
Beautiful, thank you.
Thank you.
I would love to return to the idea of the uncovering or the revelation that is an apocalypse. Just thinking how to frame this. So in a moment of understanding that a life has changed in your characters' moments of understanding that their lives have changed. Many of them seem to make a decision that completely alters how they present themselves to the world too.
Right, that's interesting.
And that's also fascinating to me, that part of your choice there is they make a choice to completely define themselves in a different way. How do you find they drive you, or do you make those choices?
I make those choices, but they're within the context of the character. So it's a bit of a collaboration. I would say that, you know, the more you revise, the better you get to know your character and you realize what choices they would make. This is unrelated, but I just wanted to mention my lapel mic gets quiet if I turn to this side of the room. So I'm not dissing stage writing. I'm just saying, like, if I'm not looking at you, it's an AV situation.
Beauty. I think we have time for just one more of my peppering questions before we want to move to another. So if you, oh, I have so many things I want to ask. This is terrible. Oh no, I'm going to freeze up.
Did you just break the fourth wall and go to the camera? That was great.
I did. It's my instinct.
I love it.
I can't help it. I can't help it. But I will take it right back to artist to artist. You have some time, I think I read in an interview, you have some time before your next book is due. You are doing some writing for television. What is fueling you creatively right now besides collaboration?
Collaboration, honestly. Yeah, that's the thing I've been really enjoying. Yeah, I asked for a 5-year deadline on the next book because I sold Sea of Tranquility in a 2-book deal, which I've never done before. And it was a bit of a leap of faith because I had no idea what that second book was going to be. So yeah, I have a long deadline on that. The television is going to be pretty consuming in a way that's really exciting to me.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, here's to it.
Thank you.
And here's to the work that has, I know, fueled us both before and in this pandemic era. I'd like to turn my attention to Christine. Do we have questions from the audience? Do we have time? Wonderful, wonderful. Let's open it up if we may. Yes.
Hi.
Thank you for coming.
My pleasure.
Wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I cannot wait to read the book. And
Thanks.
I didn't even know it was science fiction, so now I'm even more excited to learn better. Okay, so with that, I'm just wondering in general, how did you get your first book published? What happened?
That's a good question. So for anybody at the back who might not have heard, the question had to do with how I got my first book published. It was really lucky. So I wrote the book, which, you know, was obviously harder than I'm making it sound, but over a period of several years, I wrote Last Night in Montreal, my first novel. And then when I felt like I had a pretty good draft of it, I just started cold querying literary agents. And the form that took is I would send, I think it was 3 sample chapters and a cover letter, just down this list of agents that I came across. Most of them rejected it within 48 hours. It was this incredibly fast turnaround time. But the 13th or 14th one was this woman named Emily Jacobson at Curtis Brown, to whom Station 11 is dedicated. And she requested the full manuscript. Then she rejected it too, which yeah, that's what it usually looks like starting out. But she did so with this really long, thoughtful editorial letter, which was basically a list of problems that she had with the book. I didn't understand why character X did that. I didn't understand why this happened here. And I remember reading that letter and thinking, well, there's no guarantee of future representation here. But if I were to take this advice, then in the worst case scenario, I'd have a better book. So I spent 6 months revising based on that letter. And then she very graciously agreed to take a second look at the manuscript and then took me on as a client, which was one of the most exciting days of my life. She had kind of an old school way of doing business. She sent that manuscript out to one publisher at a time. So it took about 2 years for it to get rejected by 35 publishers. Eventually it landed at this tiny press called Unbridled Books, which I don't think exists anymore. I think they're kind of on hiatus at this point. They published it and they were wonderful. I stayed with them for 3 books. So that was how I did it. If anybody out here is thinking about trying to publish a book, a better way to get an agent is find a book that's in some way similar to what you've written. Find out who the agent is. That'll be in the acknowledgments or the author's website. And then you're in a great position to send a query to that agent and say, you know, I've written a short story collection, so say that's similar in the following ways to your client so-and-so's story collection. I wondered if you might be interested in taking a look. And that immediately elevates you to the very top of the pile because you're a serious person who's done a tiny bit of research. So that's how to do it.
Right back here, yes, in the middle.
You mentioned that you could have written 10 different novels. So would they have had the same ending?
No,
And
they would.
how did you choose which path to take?
So the question was, you know, with my process, if I get to a point at the end where I feel I could have written 10 different novels, would they have the same ending and how did I choose that path? It just feels like a series of binary choices, you know, as you move through a draft, trying to figure out what the plot is, trying to figure out who the characters are. And yeah, I'm left with this feeling like, well, if I'd done this particular thing differently in chapter 2, then the book would have gone like way off in a completely different direction and maybe even been a different genre. So yeah, in that hypothetical, it's 10 completely different endings of 10 different books.
Very far in the back, yes.
Yeah, sure. So the question was about my family of origin and what my parents were like, if they were teachers or writers. My parents, they are and were interesting people. They were kind of back to the land hippies in the 70s in Western Canada. So I grew up on Vancouver Island and then on Denman Island, which is a tiny island between Vancouver Island and the mainland in the far west of Canada. Keeping your kids home from school was just this kind of back to the land thing that people were doing back then. So they homeschooled me for kindergarten just as an experiment. And then that experiment somehow persisted until I was 15 when I went into an alternate high school. They were not teachers. That's which, you know, they were people who loved books and that really mattered. So I had an incredible amount of time to read when I was a kid because if you don't go to school, you got some time on your hands, which is good and bad. In my case, it was good. There was a period of time when I was about 8 or 9 years old when one of the requirements of a candidly slightly haphazard curriculum was that I had to write something every day. So starting from when I was 8 or 9, I got in the habit of writing, and I give my mother full credit for this. She set me out on that road of writing. I had to write a short story or a poem every day. I'm not implying in any way that they were good. You know, it's like, we're talking like rhyming poems about cats and daffodils or whatever 8-year-olds are into. But it did get me into the habit. And that was something that I really loved. My whole childhood and into adolescence and then later, I was training pretty seriously to be a dancer. So I was at the ballet school 6 days a week. My post-secondary education is in contemporary dance. But I was always writing. It was just something I really loved doing. And there was a point when I was about 21 or so when I didn't want to be a dancer anymore. I just fallen out of love with it. And I started to take the writing more seriously. So yeah, it was my childhood was being homeschooled in the woods and writing and writing. Yeah.
Yes.
I think you could speak well to being an artist. And I'm about to send an 18-year-old from Milwaukee to New York City. And I keep coming back to your title, Sea of Tranquility. And I'm thinking about your upbringing in Vancouver
Right.
and that being more tranquil. And now you're a New York City artist. You live the artist life in many ways. Can you kind of talk about the choosing of the title? It's a very broad question, but there's so many themes there that
Right.
coming back to me. So just speak to that.
Yeah, sure. So the question has to do with, I guess transitioning really from going from a tranquil place to a much busier place, and also the title, Sea of Tranquility. Titles are hard is the short answer there. It's always just kind of the coolest thing I can come up with, if we're being honest. So yeah, I think Sea of Tranquility is a beautiful name for the flatlands on the moon where the Apollo mission landed. So yeah, I wanted to use it for the title, even though there are other books with that same title. For me personally, going from a small, tranquil place to a big city felt like freedom. I really felt like it suited me. Some people love living in small communities just because of that, because it's a community and you know everybody. When I was a teenager, I found that condition to be a little bit claustrophobic. So when I was 18, I went from this tiny, very rural island to the city of Toronto. And what I remember of that transition is that walking down the street in this big city, in this place where nobody knew me, it just felt like freedom. I love the anonymity of big cities. So I think it just comes down to temperament, but it always suited me better. When I think about the island where I grew up, I actually had this whole autobiographical riff about it in Station 11, where the character Arthur is from that island in the book, not the show. And he's describing it to somebody at a cocktail party. And his line, which is absolutely autobiographical, he said, I loved it. It was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen. It was gorgeous and claustrophobic. I loved it and I always wanted to escape. And that was my relationship to the place where I grew up.
I think we have time for one more question. Yes.
So the question's about adaptation, about what it was like having Station 11 adapted for TV and about what the adaptations are that I'm working on now. I was very removed from the Station 11 adaptation. The showrunner, Patrick Somerville, who's actually from Wisconsin, he acquired the property, he acquired the book. He called me in the fall of 2017 to say, I've been able to bring this project over to Paramount. It's real. We're going to start developing this. There's going to be a writer's room. He did offer me the opportunity to be involved, that, I had no TV writing experience at all. He said there could be a place for you in the writer's room if you're interested. But at that point, I was so deeply immersed in the Glass Hotel that going to Station 11 felt like going back in time somehow. So what I said to him then was, you know what, I trust you. I don't know how to write for TV. I'm in this other project, go do your thing. So he went and did his thing. And this spectacular series is what came out of it. I really love the series, if you can't tell. And I'm just a huge fan. So I was really removed. I signed off on one or two major things. I signed off on the location change from Toronto to Chicago. But otherwise, I had this sense that if I were in Patrick's position, if I were adapting a well-known book for TV, that it might not be super helpful to have the author kind of looking over my shoulder. So I was very conscious of giving him a lot of space to make that project. And months would go by when we had no communication. We just text occasionally. And then, I got to see the finished thing and I loved it. It just feels like extraordinary good luck. So then, not that long ago, a few months ago, I had optioned the Glass Hotel to another company. That project failed to sell. It's a really difficult market. And then Patrick contacted my reps and he had this new idea for the Glass Hotel. If you guys have seen Station 11, you might have noticed Danielle Deadweiler's performance as Miranda. She is absolutely spectacular. Patrick said, what if we did the Glass Hotel as a vehicle for Danielle Deadweiler, the Miranda character? She can solve the mystery that Leon's trying to solve in the book. And I love that idea, being able to have character overlap between TV series in the same way that it exists between the books. Building this multiverse on television as well as in fiction. So that's what I've been working on. And then I'm also working with Patrick on Sea of Tranquility as a separate project. So it's just been wonderful. It's this feeling of building a multiverse with my friends. And it's been such a pleasure.
As has this conversation. Thank you so much for your time and your thought and your open heart for all of us.
My pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for being here, everybody. And I know
Thank you all so much.
Shannon's going to wrap us up here. Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, that was fun. I feel like I could listen to you ladies all day. Thank you again. Yes, we are wrapping up so you can all enjoy the rest of 414 Milwaukee Day. But before we go, just a couple of things. First, we have a lot of people to thank. So our event partners, Daniel Golden and Boswell Books, as many of you know, a local bookstore in Milwaukee who's been an ongoing partner for Friends and the library. So thank you so much. Daniel helps curate our author choices, and I think he did fabulously this year, of course. The Wisconsin Club, so this gorgeous venue that we are in, has been an enduring partner and just makes this event so amazing. So thanks to the Wisconsin Club for having us back. Our table sponsors, Carrie Killerin, Gimbal Riley, Guerin and Brown, the Leader Financial Group, Mary Sprague and Nancy Ruse, Optum United Health Group, Von Briesen and Roper. Our patron sponsors, Amy Billard Daniels, Hannah Dugan, Ellen Irian, who we must note was a key organizer of this event again this year. Thank you so much, Ellen. Ray Irian, Casey Rip, Jess Rip, another key organizer, Margie Stratton, and I want a special call out to Barbara Francic, our past president, who was very involved again this year. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you all for coming. Again, if you're curious, what more can I do to support the library, to be a friend? Join us as a friend at any level. Stop by our bookstore just next door. Bring in your gently used books. We'd love to have them and turn it around again as a gift to the library. And if you had fun today, we will be back at the Wisconsin Club for the Ben Franklin Awards ceremony on September 22nd. So mark your calendars. More information to come on that very soon. And I would be remiss if I did not mention that Miss St. John Mandel will be sticking around to personalize books for I think about 30 minutes before she flies back to New York City. So thank you again. So if you have a moment, please stop by and take advantage of that opportunity. Thank you all again for joining us. Can't wait to see you next year.